All right, welcome back. Talking about free will. Does anyone have free will? First of all, we should notice that we act as if people have free will. We assume that they have free will when we blame people for things. So we'll say that the person should be punished because they did the crime of their own free will. If we feel like they were forced to do something that's a crime, um, we might not punish them. We might excuse them from that. Maybe somebody put a gun to their head and made them drive the getaway car. At that point, we would say, okay, they don't have free will, and so we're not going to blame them for what happened. Likewise, we will praise people for things that they've done of their own free will. So you took it upon yourself to take time out of your day to pick up trash in a park. Nobody was making you do that. And so we might say, yay, that was great, and praise you for that because you did it of your own free will. So we certainly do think and act as if we ourselves have free will and the people around us have free will. What we're going to do now is talk about whether or not that assumption makes sense. And I'm going to show you an argument that comes from a German French philosopher uh, with the last name Holbach. Baron Holbach is his name. It's got a cool name. And he's offering um, an argument against our having free will. And it's, it's four steps, but I actually think it's a pretty straightforward argument. I think you'll be able to understand it. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into his argument. Let's just note also that in order to answer this question of does anyone have free will, we're going to have to think about what free will means. So we're going to learn about Holbach's definition. We'll learn about some other people's definitions. I'm going to want you to think about which definition of free will makes sense to you because that will likely determine your answer to our question of does anyone have free will. So here's Holbach. I am taking his ideas from the reading and sort of consolidating it into a valid argument so that we can just focus on whether or not the premises are reasonable. But the structure of his thinking seems to be this: um, for any action, call it A. Number one, premise one, if A is performed, then A is caused by a motive. So he thinks that actions are caused by motives. Number two, if an action is caused by a motive, then the agent of the action is not the first cause of the action. And then below, I've got a definition of the agent as the person performing the action. So two is saying if there's a motive for that caused an action, then the agent is not the first cause of that action. Number three, if the agent of the action is not the first cause of the action, then the action is not free. And that's going to be based on his definition of free action, which we'll look at soon. And then we get the conclusion that if A is performed, then A is not free. And again, he's saying this for any action. So for any action that's ever done, if it's done, it's not free. So anything you ever do is not free. Anything I ever do is not free. People around you not acting freely. Why is that? Well, because when they act, they're acting with a motive, and there's a cause of that motive that's not you. And so you are not the first cause of the action. So you're not acting freely. Let me go through some examples to explain this. Let's talk about an example close to home for me: eating pizza. So I've always loved pizza. Back in the old days, I used to work at a pizza place in college. I made pizzas and delivered pizzas and did all things pizza. And I would work all day with pizza. And then I would come home after work and make a frozen pizza. So definitely love for me for pizza. Um, so let's say the action in our example is Scott's act of eating pizza. What motivates me to eat pizza is my love of pizza. It's my desire for yummy food. I think pizza is yummy. And so that desire is my motive. What premise one would say is that I ate the pizza because of that motive for yummy food. So if A is performed, then A is caused by a motive. A is my act of eating the pizza. It's caused by my motive to have yummy food. Okay, so far that makes sense. Premise two is saying that my motive is caused by my brain, but that's caused by my parents, which their motives may be caused by their parents and so on. But what it means is that I am not the first cause of my act of eating pizza. Where did I get this motive to eat yummy food? It must have been instilled in me from my parents, who probably had it instilled in them from their parents. Things could be instilled in you from not just parents, it could be friends, societal pressures. It could be that your brain is just wired a certain way and it's sort of biologically forced to have a certain motive. But where does that biology come? It comes from your genes, which comes from your parents. And so, what premise two is saying is that anytime there's a motive that's causing somebody to do something, the agent of the action, the actual person, is not the first cause. There's always a cause going earlier in time, predating that agent. So, like, I like the yummy, I like pizza because I think it's yummy. Where did I get that idea? Maybe my society, maybe my parents. I'm going to say probably my parents. I remember they used to take us to Lito's Pizza. Don't get me started on Lito's Pizza. Amazing pizza. Um, Out of Maryland, originated there, where I'm from, where I grew up. But anyway, I'll try to control myself and not talk about Lito's Pizza. But the point is that that Holbach's making is that anytime someone does something with a motive, they're not the first cause of that action because their motive came from some other place. The motive came from maybe society, their parents, friends. It could be just their brain is wired that way, but because the brain is wired that way, it came from the genes that came from the parents. And so it's really whatever you do, if it's done with a motive, it's you're not the first cause of it. There's a cause that predates you that we can always find for why you have that motive. All right. So, more support for premise two. All right. So, premise two, the idea that there's always a cause of the motive that a person has support from a general idea called determinism, which you may have heard before. Determinism is the idea that every event in the present is caused by an event in the past. Anything that's happening right now is caused by something that happened in the past. You're right now maybe watching this video on your phone. Why is that? Because there was a time in the past when you signed up for this course, and there was another time in the past when I made this video, and so on and so forth. So things that are happening now are caused by things that happened in the past. You're driving on a street. Why are you driving on a street? Because somebody in the past made a street. Um, so determinism is a scientific idea. Scientists will often go along with determinism because they try to provide causal explanations of things. So scientists are often trying to figure out, why is such and such happening? Why is there like COVID, for instance, right? What was the cause of COVID? And so lots of scientists are trying to dig into like what was it that caused COVID to spread, because they think that there are causal explanations. So if determinism is true, then there's always a cause that goes back in time, presumably until the beginning of time. Um, and so if we go back to the example of my um, eating the pizza out of the motive to have yummy food, that motive, we can trace that motive, um, the origin of that motive from some event that took place before I was around. Um, yeah. So go to premise three. So premise three is saying if the agent of the action is not the first cause of the action, then the action is not free. Well, that idea is based on Holbach's definition of a free action. So let's look at this thing. The definition is saying that an action, let's call it A, is free, equals by definition, or means the same thing as the agent of the action is the first cause of the action. Okay. So in order for your act to be free, you need to be the first cause of that act. So here's an example that supports Holbach's definition. We've got a hypnotist who has hypnotized Harry to wave his hands. So the hypnotist has done their thing, and now Harry is waving his hands around. Intuitively, Harry's action doesn't seem free because it's the hypnotist, not Harry, who's causing the action. So when we hear about things like that, the hypnotist is making this person do things. We feel like it's not the person who's doing it, it's the hypnotist. Holbach's definition would go along with that and say if you're not the first cause of an action happening, it's not free. Now, there are other definitions of a free action. So I want to talk now about some ways that somebody might try to object to Holbach's argument against free action. Okay, so probably the most likely place people are going to object is to premise three. And they're going to say that three is too strict because there are other definitions of a free action that make more sense, that allow more actions to be free. Because again, intuitively, remember how we started out the video, there are lots of times when we at least assume that somebody's acting freely, like, somebody purposefully robs a bank, plans it out, does the act. We're inclined to say that their act was free, and then we punish them for that. So some people try to come up with definitions of a free action that make a little more sense intuitively in terms of like the range of situations where we think we act freely. Here's one that's pretty popular. So this is used to object to premise three. So basically people are objecting to premise three by saying, well, Holbach's definition isn't right because this free action, this choice definition of free action is correct instead. So here's something, a definition that an action is free means the agent of the action chooses to do it. So Harry didn't choose to wave his hands. Instead, it was the hypnotist who made him do it. According to the choice definition, his action is not free, and it doesn't seem free. So, like, what if you're in this class, but only because somebody else registered you for it, which is really unlikely because they'd have to like get your login information and all that stuff. But what if they did, and they registered you for this class? Then we would say, well, that poor student didn't choose to be in this class, and so they're not here freely. And that makes sense. So the choice definition is saying that actions are free if they're chosen. However, there are a number of times when we would say that just because someone chose something, it wasn't free. So here's an objection to this idea, the drug addict, right? So they choose more drugs because they're under the throes of the drug. So they've been doing the drug, they're under the influence of the drug. People, when they're under the influence of the drug, might choose to take more drugs, but it doesn't seem like their action is free, even though they're making that choice. Go back to the individual who has a gun to their head and told you're going to drive the getaway car. while we rob the bank. The person with the gun to their head, they might choose to go ahead and drive the getaway car, but it's not much of a choice because it's either drive the getaway car or their life. So they're making a choice, but it doesn't seem free. So this definition of a free action, it's pretty popular. Like a lot of people think, like, you know, you should be blamed, for instance, because you chose to do the thing. Um, but as we can see with the drug addict example or the person who's like got a gun to their head, there may be times when someone's choosing something, but they're not free. Well, here's another definition of a free action that's attributed to a famous philosopher named David Hume, Scottish philosopher. And this is a really popular definition of free action, so it's worth talking about. An action A is free, means that the agent could do otherwise if they wanted to. Could do otherwise if they wanted to. Um, so, what if we put a criminal behind bars and there they are behind the bars? Are they acting freely when they're behind the bars? Well, again, common sense would say they don't really have free will anymore. We took it away because they did a crime and now they're behind bars. And so Hume's definition of free action would say, no, they're not free because they can't do anything if they wanted to. They can't leave if they wanted to. Or if we go back to the hypnotist situation, so we've got Harry who's been hypnotized to wave his hands. If he wanted to change things and not wave his hands, he can't. Like he's under the influence of the hypnotist. He couldn't change if he wanted to. Um, so this definition definitely makes sense of a lot of cases. So, what if you like signed up for this class and it's like before, I guess, yeah. So you signed up for the class. You could have withdrawn by the withdrawal date, but you chose to stay in this class. You could have dropped the class if you wanted to, but you didn't. And so Hume's definition would say your act of being in the class is free. Again, there's a lot intuitive about this definition, but I am going to give you both sides. So I'm going to give you an example that challenges Hume's definition. And again, he's saying action's free if the agent could do otherwise if they wanted to. There's an objection that comes from another philosopher named John Locke. You might have heard of him in the world of like political science, um, economics. John Locke challenges Hume's definition by trying to come up with an example where someone couldn't do otherwise if they wanted to, but their action is still free. So it's his example is called Locke's Locked Room. So it's John Locke's Locked Room. Here's an example that's based on that. Larry willingly goes to his friend's apartment for a party. Unbeknownst to him, his friend has locked everyone in. So that's a little weird. Why did the host lock everyone in? I don't know. But at this point, no one can leave the party if they wanted to. It's locked, I guess, maybe from the outside. But Larry is having a great time at the party. Larry is right where he wants to be. Um, so, according to the objector, Larry's act of being at the party is free because he's doing what he wants to be doing. But Hume's definition of free action would say that his action isn't free because he couldn't leave if he wanted to. He's in this locked room, so he can't leave if he wanted to. Hume's definition would say his action isn't free when, again, common sense, or at least Locke's idea, is that the person is acting freely when they're where they want to be, even though they couldn't do otherwise if they wanted to. So this example, it's a famous example within philosophy, Locke's locked room. It also can challenge Holbach's definition. So Holbach is saying that an action's free if the agent is the first cause of the action. Um, so, like, it seems like when Larry's at the party and he's stuck in there, the reason why he's stuck in there is because the host locked everybody in. So Larry is not the first cause of his action. It's the it's the host. And yet you might think Larry's action is still free. Okay. So at this point, we have a bit of a conundrum. We have a little bit of a dilemma here in terms of like, how are you, now I'm talking to you, like, how are you going to react to this? So we've got this question of, does anyone have free will? Um, and I think we can see at least two sides to this question. So, does anyone have free will? Well, on the one side, there's Holbach's idea. Nobody has free will because everything you do is based on a motive, and the motive comes from some other place. In order to be free, you've got to be the first cause of your action. You never are because your motive comes from some other place. Common sense says, though, that sometimes our acts are free. Sometimes when we like decide, hey, it's a Friday night, I'm going to go to the movies. Nobody's making you do that. You just come up with this idea on your own. You go and do that. You put thought into it. You pick your movie, buy the ticket, go to the movie, watch the movie, enjoy yourself, walk out. We think about stuff like that. We're inclined to say that person acted freely. Um, but then what explains why that act is free? Well, you might think that the act is free because of the um, choice definition. Maybe you think that the reason why the action is free is because the agent chooses to do it. But then we know that there may be objections to that. What about the drug addict who chooses to take more drugs, but it's not really free because they're compelled to by the addiction? Or you might think, well, the reason why you go to the movies freely is because you could have done otherwise if you wanted to. Maybe you like Hume's definition of a free action. But then on the other hand, we can see that there might be examples like Locke's locked room where somebody is acting freely even though they're locked in someplace. And then the other kind of bit of the conundrum here is that we might um, say that even though you go to the movies on a Friday night out of a desire to see a good movie, and even though that desire may come from other people, and so you're not the first cause, um, you might think, well, the action's still free. So perhaps you're thinking that um, that you really are the first cause of the action. What if you think that when you go to the movies, the reason why you went to the movies is you made that decision? Well, at that point, you would be disagreeing with determinism. You're saying that this event in the present is caused by an event in the present, that it wasn't some event in the past. So you really kind of have to pick your poison here with this issue. On the one hand, you could say nobody has free will, and you could go along with the Holbach's argument, but then you've got to bite the bullet and say that when we blame or praise people, we're mistaken to do that because we're blaming and praising them based on they're having free will when really they don't. On the other hand, you could say that yes, we do have free will because of one of these definitions of a free action, like the choice definition or Hume's definition, but then you'd have to figure out what to say about these objections, like the drug addict or Locke's locked room. And so, what's happening right now in philosophy is that philosophers are trying to find a definition of a free action that makes the most sense. Um, but there are also some philosophers who simply embrace Holbach's idea that we just don't have free will and we need to change the way we think about things. So there really isn't one opinion among philosophers about what to do with this question. Um, it's one where there isn't a consensus. There are different ways to address it. I want you to think about, what do you believe? Do you think you have free will? If so, what's your definition of free will? Are there any problems with your definition? If so, how could you reword it to fix it up? If you don't have free will, then I would say try to adjust the way you think about things in order to be consistent with that idea. All right. It's been a pleasure chatting with you about this topic. Keep thinking about it, and thank you for the time.